for us to get a great cup of coffee in the future, it's going to require additional deforestation and additional clearing of the forest lands up the hills to higher elevation where the coffees will grow more slowly again. And so that's really something that Jarrett and I looked at each other and said, we can actually make a better cup of coffee, a more consistent cup of coffee, but we can also create a cup of coffee that doesn't require additional deforestation in the future. And with half of the coffee crops having to be moved in the next 30 years, that's really quite a toll that we don't want our morning cup to contribute to that much deforestation. We think we can create a better cup without having to do that.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 30 of the Business for Good podcast. Now, on previous episodes of this show, you've heard about pork without pigs. You've heard about milk without cows. You've heard about diamonds without mining. You've even heard about wood without trees. Well, this time we're exploring the brave new world of coffee without the bean. Turns out there's a lot of deforestation for coffee growing, and climate change is making the situation a lot worse. In fact, experts predict that the amount of land suitable for growing coffee is expected to shrink by an estimated 50% in the next few decades. But what if you could make coffee out of agricultural byproducts instead of coffee beans, like watermelon seeds and sunflower seed husks? You think it wouldn't taste as good? Well, according to a Seattle-based startup called Atomo, they've not only recreated the exact taste of coffee, but they go on to claim that in blind taste tests of their brew versus Starbucks, 7 out of 10 people preferred the taste of their so-called molecular coffee. Company co-founders Andy Kleitsch and Jarrett Stopforth began with a successful Kickstarter, giving them enough funds to do the food science necessary to crack the coffee code. After putting out a press release about their prototype, investors came calling, and literally within days, they'd signed a term sheet for $2.6 million of investment. Now, Atomo is brewing, making coffee in which they can precisely control the amount of caffeine and much, much more. It's a fascinating tale of one more way in which food tech innovation may help alleviate pressure that we are placing on the planet. So sit back and maybe enjoy a cup of coffee while listening, and know that that cup in the future may be even tastier for you and better for the planet. I now bring you the interview with the co-founders of Atomo Molecular Coffee. Andy and Jarrett, welcome to Business for Good.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
I see that you all are drinking coffee right now. Are you drinking actual coffee or are you drinking Atomo coffee?
We're drinking what we like to call conventional coffee. We are making coffee without the beans.
Nice.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll be drinking what's last gen rather than new gen coffee. How about that?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right. So you guys are making coffee without beans. A lot of folks have heard about, for example, making meat without animals. People have heard about making milk without animals. Not many people, including myself until recently, have heard about making coffee without beans. So before we get into how you are doing it, why would you possibly want to do that?
Good question. So, this is Jared, and I'm a food scientist, by training. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I have my doctorate in food science, and I've been innovating and creating products for a long time. And, I love perfection in a lot of things. And I also love to know how I can break things and build them back up. And, a couple of years back, I had this concept in my head when I just had enough of lousy coffee. And I thought to myself, there must be a way to create perfect coffee. There must be a way that we can hack it and bring it back together to be consistently great. And, so started researching and looking into it in, as a garage project, just sort of printing out research and going through it and connecting things. And and that was the impetus behind it. And around that time is when, Andy was looking for his next startup. And Andy's been in the startup world for about 25 years, tech, fintech. And he was looking for his next project. And Andy wanted something that was better for the world, better for the environment. And we got to sitting down and he said to me, what is something you wish you were working on full time that you're not today? And I explained to him, like, I want to build coffee without the bean. To which his response was, you're blowing my mind. Why would you ever want to do that? And we started working on it. We started looking at it together. And that's when we actually really, both of us, realized the real impacts of the coffee industry. And do you want to build on that?
Yes. And so the coffee industry, like Jared mentioned, is actually in trouble. And in fact, large coffee companies acknowledge this widely, and it's been on their radar for a decade. But really, the consumers out there are just hearing about this for the first time. And that is that where coffee is grown today is highly susceptible to climate change. So the earth is warming, right? And as it warms, certain areas are affected more than others. And the areas that are really affected right now are in those growing regions where coffee is being grown today. And what's happening is those farmers, when they grow coffee, it actually ripens too quickly. And so when coffee ripens too quickly, it loses a lot of the aroma and the flavor and the things that you would expect in a great cup of coffee. And so what the farmers are doing to combat that is it's called up farming. They're actually moving their farms further up the hills. They're clearing additional forest. So for us to get a great cup of coffee in the future, it's going to require additional deforestation and additional clearing of the forest lands up the hills to higher elevation where the coffees will grow more slowly again. And so that's really something that Jarrett and I looked at each other and said, we can actually make a better cup of coffee, a more consistent cup of coffee, but we can also create a cup of coffee that doesn't require additional deforestation in the future. And with half of the coffee crops having to be moved in the next 30 years, that's really quite a toll that we don't want our morning cup to contribute to that much deforestation. We think we can create a better cup without having to do that.
Andy, when you say it is better and it's preferred, what is it preferred over?
So today, when we compare our coffee, we compare it against Starbucks. And so that's our gold standard right now that we compare all of our taste tests against. And we've done this at the University of Washington with students. We've taken it. We actually just had CNBC in our office, and they took a load of our coffee out to the streets of Seattle and tasted it against Starbucks, in a blind taste test. And what we find is that it's really consistent. 70% of people prefer our coffee over Starbucks. And there's a reason behind it. When Jarrett was doing the formulations, we really identified that certain chlorogenic acids and other compounds contribute to bitter flavor. And so we started removing the bitter flavor from coffee. And what we found was when you present someone with a Starbucks, which is quite bitter, or a non-bitter cup of coffee, about 70% of people like a non-bitter coffee.
So you're making a non-bitter coffee, and I know from reading about you guys and listening to some interviews of yours, you don't disclose what is actually in this coffee alternative yet. You've said that maybe you're using, for example, watermelon seeds or sunflower seed husks. You want to upcycle ingredients, but what can you tell us about what it is? So apparently it looks and tastes like coffee, but it's not actual. There's no coffee beans in it. What can you tell us about what it is that you've actually done? And if somebody's drinking it, what are they drinking?
Yeah, so naturally we are remaining purposefully opaque at this point in time because we're still in R&D phase. We haven't launched yet. And when we do, there will be great transparency in how we're doing it and what we're doing, right? So the examples that you listed are examples that we've spoken about because they're things that we looked at, things that we evaluated, and they kind of give you the idea of the types of materials that we're looking. We have this mantra in our office of create, don't destroy, right? We want to make stuff, but we want to create from existing. We don't want to destroy to create. And so, we have been looking at a number of different industries where there are streams for which there are no value and taking those and adding value to them because the big thing about how we do that is we've mapped coffee, right? We understand from the green bean to the roasted bean to the extracted, which is the coffee you drink, how the compounds and molecules change. I mean, coffee is made up of over 1,000 compounds. It's one of the most complex beverages or foods out there. And so we have mapped what really makes coffee and how to get there as an entry to the flavor. And we consider it to break up into what we call the big five, color, aroma, flavor, body or mouthfeel, and bioactives. And that makes up how you experience coffee. For us, coffee is that experience and the result, right? So in those big five, we go and we look to see the compounds and molecules that make up those big five, and we try to derive those from upcycled materials for which we can add value.
All right. So I understand what you guys are trying to do. It seems really cool. And if you're really getting 70% preference, I'm sure that you will have a lot of success once you launch this, presumably that it is going to be marketed for a similar amount of money as regular coffee. Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, that is. I mean, I think when we first approach the market, it will probably be considered to be a high-end third wave cup of coffee, maybe similar to like a Stumptown, coffee. But absolutely, our goal is that this will be a very approachable price point for.
So it's not like something that is more of a novelty item that you could only buy once. This is something that people would still be able to buy regularly as long as they're willing to spend something reasonable on coffee.
Right,
their daily ritual.
Exactly, and the point there being, right, is we can't drive change and affect the environment and affect the globe that we care so much about until we can reach the masses. And so we want to make it accessible for all.
So let's talk about the company then, Atomo Coffee. First off, what does Atomo mean?
Yeah, so Atomo is when we were looking for a name for the company, we probably had 500 names. I'm not sure. And what we started realizing was that it was all about this molecular coffee, and then we came up with the idea of atom. And Atomo is the word atom in Italian. It's our little nod to coffee culture in America. That this is the atom. And so if you were Italian, you might say Atomo.
Atomo. So is one or both of you of Italian descent?
No.
And forgive my ignorance, but when you say Italy has some coffee culture, I don't know enough about coffee culture to say, is Italy known for great coffee, or what's the deal with that?
I think Italy puts itself on the map for being the first to actually have added milk.
Oh, interesting.
Lattes and so on as we know them today to coffees to add a more aromatic, more mouthfeel, etc. And I mean, there's large coffee companies out there, Illy, right?
Yeah, and Starbucks. I mean, in general, kind of the lore is that as Howard Schultz went to Italy and saw the cafe culture, that it really inspired him to bring that cafe culture back to the United States. And so I think a lot of Starbucks today, what we experience at Starbucks is really his version of that Italian culture.
Exactly. That's why they call it the big gulp.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, speaking of lore regarding coffee, I read that the coffee bean was basically discovered in Ethiopia. Was that right? Like the lore is that there was some herder in Ethiopia and his goats got very excited and they're eating this. They have a lot more energy. So maybe the fact that Italy colonized Ethiopia, there's some connection there, that there's some miscegenation of ideas when it comes to coffee in Italy. That's interesting. So every time I pronounce it now, it'll be Atomo. And
actually, that's great, but we say Atomo, right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. So you started the company with a Kickstarter. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, the Kickstarter was really our way of validating if anyone wanted to buy a cup of coffee that was made without a bean, right? And so when we first, when Jarrett first told me that his idea about creating this coffee without a bean, it blew my mind. And then we went and told some investor friends of ours about it, and they all had the same question, which is, what's it made out of?
Why?
Why? What's it made out of? And is anyone going to buy it? Mm-hmm. And so we thought, well, let's launch a Kickstarter campaign and see if we can explain why we're doing it, what it's made out of, and see if anyone will buy it. And we were really pleasantly surprised. I mean, as soon as we launched our Kickstarter campaign, we immediately the orders started coming in, and we sold 64,000 cups of coffee over the course of our Kickstarter.
At a cost per cup of
about 30 cents.
Oh, okay.
And so we realized that it was very, comparable to what you would be charging for any kind of high-end cup of coffee as far as grounds go. And so very comparable to a Starbucks or Stumptown price. And what we realized, though, was that the audience that was very interested in our dream and our vision, the audience that wanted to go on this journey with us, were really the people that were concerned about sustainability and that wanted a great cup of coffee, but wanted a more sustainable option. And that's kind of where we found our tribe. if you will.
So I'm no mathlete. So if you sell 64,000 cups times 30 cents, how much money do you raise in the Kickstarter?
Not enough to make our we raised about $25,000.
Okay.
And like we said, that was really just as an indicator for us to determine if there was interest.
Now, logistically, how are you going to get all of those grounds to those thousands of customers once you decide to launch?
Sure. I mean, that's actually, let's just kind of rewind a bit and say, we did sell grounds. And in our development process, we started looking at like ready to drink beverages, grounds, and beans. We actually want to reverse engineer the coffee bean and create beans. And so on this journey, as we were tasting our product, we determined that our cold brew is really coming along nicely. And so we've started working on getting our cold brew to market first, which means that our Kickstarter backers who purchased our ground coffee are just going to have to wait just a little bit longer than we anticipated. So we're going to launch the cold brew first just because it's tasting so good. We're going to send some cold brew to our Kickstarter backers, but then we're going to be sending out the grounds shortly thereafter. But we're still in development of the grounds.
So in this case, the early birds do not get the worm. Although I guess patience is a virtue. You can, if you want another truism. Good things come to those who wait.
Yeah, they get stickers, they get cups, they get cold brew, and they get their grounds as well. So they get it all.
All right, very good. So 25,000 from the Kickstarter, obviously not enough, but I know that you guys have raised some money from some big name investors, including, for example, the CEO of Soylent, someone who I'm sure is very attracted to your idea of making coffee without the bean, but also from Horizons Ventures, Li Ka-shing and Selena Chow's fund from China. These are folks who have been big investors in alternative protein, from Perfect Day, which is making cow's milk without cows, to Hampton Creek, which is now it's making mayonnaise without eggs, and so on. So tell us about that. How much have you guys raised, and what's it been like raising money from some of the biggest names in alternative food tech venture capital?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a note out to the other entrepreneurs on, listening to this right now. Like, one of the things that we thought the Kickstarter might do, and this was part of our plan early on, was we thought, rather than us trying to find out which venture capitalists are interested in coffee without the bean, by putting out our Kickstarter, by putting out a press release, maybe those, venture capitalists will find us. Maybe they'll hear about this and actually contact us. And I got to say that actually worked really well for us. Jarrett and I have both done startups in the past. Both had to raise funds for those startups. That can be quite a grind. Any entrepreneur that's listening to this that's had to do that, that's had to go down to Sand Hill Road and contact 50 venture capitalists and pitch and pitch and pitch. The struggle. The struggle is real, right? And
you guys are certainly familiar with the grind.
Yeah, we did a done. Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Yes. So, but we have to say that the experience with this product has been completely the opposite. We put out that Kickstarter within about 5 days of announcing ourselves. Horizon Ventures had found out about us and flew out to Seattle, met with us, tasted our coffee, loved it. And within about 5 days of that meeting, we had a term sheet signed.
Amazing. It's a very similar story to Perfect Day, who we featured in episode 20 of this podcast. They, I don't know if you're familiar with those guys, but they're making cow's milk.
Yep.
Yeah, so the CEO of Perfect Day, who at that time was in his early 20s, wrote a piece for New Scientist, like a one-page piece about his company, and Horizons saw it and messaged him and said, "Can you come to China? I want to taste your milk." And, he had never been to China. They didn't even have any real prototype that was ready for it. But of course, they decided that they would do it. And they flew out there, and Selena Chow herself tasted it and did not like it, but thought it was promising enough that they left with $2 million in investment from them. So, and now these guys who are running it, who are actually still in their 20s, have already raised over $60 million for Perfect Day, and they're teamed up with ADM, the ingredients company. So maybe this portends similarly good things for you guys in the years to come.
Yeah,
certainly. Yep.
yeah, we have a very similar story. I think I'll share with you one little inside thing, which was funny, very similar to that. Is Selena's managers, portfolio managers, came out to Seattle, met with us, and then we put some of our coffee in the little shampoo bottles that could get through airport security, so they could back to Selena so she could try it in Hong Kong. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Now that is funny. Whoever writes your biography, I hope that story makes it in there. That's really good. So I'm guessing that based on the fact that you did not answer the question of how much you've raised, that you're not disclosing that publicly.
Oh, no, we actually are. We are.
Okay.
We just take time to tell our story.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let me ask it again. Andy and Jared, how much money has Atomo raised?
Yep. So today we've raised $2.6 million.
Good for you. And I see that you are working with Matson, which is the huge food product development company that works with a lot of companies in the food space. Are they an investor, or are they just taking equity for doing free work for you? What's that relationship like?
Good question. Yeah, no, I've worked with Matson for over 6 years, and that's kind of how I know Brian Crowley at Soylent. He's a formal advisor, not an investor with us. He's a formal advisor with us.
Thank you.
I've worked with them on a number of different projects. So naturally, like, we started this in our garage, right? So we were spinning stuff in our garage, which has its limitations. And I reached out to Barb Stuckey over at Matson and asked if we could form a relationship in which we can get some work done, and we would make sure that we would take care of him. And we got started really early on with Matson, and Matson is neither a investor nor did they do any free work for equity. They were paid, but the purpose there being is that we needed lab space. And scientists also wanted to create kind of a third party between suppliers and so forth until we were ready to sort of take it on ourselves, so that we retain some autonomy in the process. So it was very deliberate.
Okay, interesting. And for those who don't know, Barb Stuckey, who runs Matson, wrote a really interesting book called Taste: Surprising Stories About Science and Why Food Tastes the Way It Does, which I read, I think it came out several years ago, but I read it, probably half a year or so ago, and I really enjoyed it. So I certainly learned a lot from it. So Matson is a cool company, and Barb is certainly a great person. So Andy, you mentioned that you've done many startups before. In fact, I think you both have. So have any of those been in the food space? Like, what have you guys done, and what happened with those companies?
Yeah, I mean, Jarrett really has done tons of food startups. I'll have him kind of talk about that. But this is my first entry into food. And so traditionally, I've just been doing software and internet startups, and started my first one back in 1995, or end of 94, really. It was the first wedding site on the internet. So if you imagine that, we did a search on Yahoo, and there was 9 matches under the word wedding. So it was completely, they were all like, a wedding of chocolate and peanut butter. It had nothing to do with the actual wedding site. And so my wife and I were engaged at the time, and we've been married, 24 years. And so we decided to start the first wedding site on the internet. And everyone thought we were completely nuts. And in fact, we heard things like that, like, I've heard it all now. Plan your wedding on the internet. So it was
as someone who did plan my wedding on the internet. Well, let me back up. I should say my wife really planned our wedding on the internet, but we used one of the wedding websites. Hopefully, it's whoever bought your company.
The Knot.
I'm sorry.
The Knot.
We use Zola, so I don't know if that's a competitor of that or not. But anyway, now it's obviously a popular thing to do, and it was really convenient. They made it awesome. So that's cool. So you founded The Knot.
Yeah, well, we founded Wedding Channel.
Wedding Channel, okay.
Yeah, nice. Which then was sold to The Knot. Okay. Yeah, and that was kind of back in the heyday of the whole internet startup. Mm-hmm. And since then, I got involved in fintech, working on products that can enable transactions on mobile phones, or enable consumers to conduct transactions at a point of sale in a grocery store with, access additional funds that they don't have access to. So, a lot of people in the grocery store might have points and miles or other, vaults of funds that they just can't access. And so, worked with really trying to enable low and medium income families to be able to access additional funds at the point of sale.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have an idea of a fintech idea where I think it would generate some publicity and therefore maybe some interest from investors. But there's like you guys are creating coffee beans without the bean. You're reverse engineering the bean, the same as is being done with meat and with milk. And there's a company that's reverse engineered rhino horn. But shark finning is a huge problem where many people in Asia like to eat shark fin soup because they believe that it has some medicinal properties. And it's pretty tasteless. Like, I don't think it would be that hard to reverse engineer. Maybe, what do I know? But that's what I would hope, at least. And, sharks are being devastated by the tens of millions for this soup where they just get pulled out of the water, cut their fins off, and throw them back to die in the ocean. But could you imagine reverse engineering it and then calling it the first fintech company? You're doing reverse engineering fintech. I think that would be newsworthy to say, we're a fintech company, which would be literally true. So for anybody out there who wants to start that, I won't even demand any equity from it, but I hope that you'll start that fintech company.
How about Jared? Jared is really, he calls it spinning. He spun all these things. And at first I'm like, what are you talking about? But that's his South African dialect on how to basically create product.
All right, nice. So when you guys come to market, what are you going to call it? So it's not coffee. There's all these wars right now over what you can call plant-based milk. Can you call it milk? What are you going to call meat that Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods are making? The Cattlemen's Association is up in arms. They've even introduced federal legislation to prohibit this from being called meat. So if you're making coffee that is completely free from the coffee bean, what are you going to call it?
Yeah, good question. The one thing to know is that coffee doesn't have a standard of identity, right? A federal standard of identity, like some of these things do. Like milk has to come from something that is lactating, right? So there's standards of identity there. There's none really with coffee, and so the way that we view it is this is coffee. It's for us, coffee is two things. It's an experience and a result, right? That's what you get with your morning cup of coffee. It's made of that big five, and it gives you that result, that caffeine kick. You got your polyphenols and antioxidants in there. Our coffee will have the same. It's not conventional coffee. It's not from that bean, but it's coffee, right? And do we foresee ourselves having the same challenges as these other analog companies? Yes, indeed we do, right? We're not going to be so naive as to believe that we will not. But there's ways around it, right? There's ways to actually introduce to the consumer without, really giving them some sense of, false pretense. We are going to be very transparent in how we communicate and through the use of our ingredients and how we arrive to this product. But for us, it's coffee.
Yeah, and we want people to know that there's a difference. I mean, we want people to have a choice. It's because right now we're finding that the people that we're talking to, when given an opportunity to have a molecular coffee that doesn't have a negative environmental impact, or to have conventional coffee, they want to make a sustainable choice. And so we actually want the consumer to know, what it is they're buying and why they're buying it and why it's a better choice. And so we want to provide that option.
If it's identical or even preferable from a sensory perspective, what is it like on the nutritional comparison? Is it similar?
Yeah, well, coffee actually doesn't have much of a nutritional panel. It's really because you're extracting flavor and aromatic compounds out of a bean. If you took a bean and you analyzed it for carbohydrates and protein and fat, you could get some nutritional facts. But if you just you go into any store, pull out a cold brew and look at the nutritional facts panel at the back, there's hardly any nutrition on there. You'll see a bunch of zeros. And that's because what you're taking out is really the experience and the result. It's not the nutrition that you're deriving from it, right? And so important to note that ours will not be any different from conventional coffee.
And so even on antioxidants, I think on the macros, I think that's right. But from what I've heard, there's some type of antioxidant benefit to drinking coffee because it is actually from a bean, right? Polyphenols,
antioxidants. Yep, exactly. You can expect the same in our product.
And what about caffeine?
Yep. In fact, the cool thing about our product is we can dial the caffeine exact. So instead of saying, hey, I'd like a cup of coffee, and you can expect anywhere from 80 to 120 milligrams of caffeine in that cup of coffee, and you just don't know, we can dial it in exact. So and produce the world's first decaf. In fact, no calf coffee.
Tell me, obviously, I've heard of decaf. You're saying the world's first decaf. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I mean, decaf as it is today, it's labeled as decaf, but you truly can't remove all the caffeine through the processes known today. You can't. So there's residual caffeine in decaf coffee, right? So we can give you coffee that has no caffeine. And so if you're somebody who really loves that taste and you love that warm cup and you want to sit in the afternoon and have it, or you want to have it after a meal, you can have it without worrying about staying up at night, because we'll give it to you without caffeine.
Interesting. All right. So Andy and Jarrett, let me ask you, you guys are multiple time entrepreneurs. You've had success in the past. I hope that you'll have success with this company too. Are there any resources that you would offer to folks who see what you all are doing and think, hey, I'd like to do something like them? Any books or videos or speeches or anything that you think has been helpful for you that you'd recommend?
So I have a very unconventional one right here. I think for years, as I've been doing startups, I've gone through phases where I will read every single Harvard Business Review book, or every single fad that comes around, every single business book that's on the shelf at the airport as you're going through the airport. Like I've gone through those years where I've just consumed and consumed and consumed. And then I think I became just a little bit just overwhelmed on the whole thing around, how to tweak business. And I actually started going the opposite direction and just reading survival books. Right? About people that are lost in a life raft, and people that are trapped at sea, and people that die on a mountaintop. And I found so many kind of analogies and comparisons with running a startup that I've found, I think, the ultimate startup book, which is called Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why.
All right. I will conclude that in the show notes. I actually watched the movie Adrift on an airplane recently. Did you see that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was so interesting. It's a true story, apparently. But anyway, it's about, people who are trapped out at sea, basically. I don't want to give anything else away since there is a big surprise ending. But
if I can say, I think the one thing about startups and that movie, like in particular, without giving anything away, is that a startup is like a series of accidents that are happening in slow motion, and so it's really about how you react to those and how you go through your day and how you persevere. And in that movie, just like in startups, and in this book I mentioned about like who lives, who dies, and why, it's about the person that's just continually doing the next right indicated thing. Their eyes are wide open. They're taking in information for what it is. They're actually doing an honest assessment of what's happening around them, and then doing the next right indicated thing. And the entrepreneurs and the people that survive really end up living for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason why they want to get home. And it's not just because for themselves, it's because for their mom or for their sister or their cat or their dog or for the world or for the planet, or they have something bigger that they're living for. And what I is that's actually, a good, guidebook for ourselves in this startup and in any startup.
Yeah, I think that is also a premise of Viktor Frankl's famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, that the people who were most likely to survive in the concentration camps during the Holocaust were those for whom they had something to live, some either family who wasn't incarcerated with them or something else. So yeah, I definitely have found that to be true. One of the funnier things that I've seen about what startup life is like, I saw a tweet recently where somebody said, starting a startup for me has helped me sleep like a baby. I wake up every 2 hours and cry. And I thought, as a pretty clever way to describe it. But yeah, also in the book Bold by the founder of X Prize, he has a good line about, people say, oh, well, Murphy's Law, things that can go bad will go bad. Well, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, your motto really ought to be, when things go bad, fix them, rather than just expecting that things are going to go wrong for you. So that's cool. We'll include Deep Survival in the show notes. So let me ask you, I already gave you guys my idea for a fintech company, but if you weren't doing this company, Atomo, and there was some other social problem you wanted to solve through starting a new venture, what ideas would you suggest for people listening that maybe they ought to take up?
Yeah, we have we have an array of thoughts on this, and Andy and I always have a debate because I always have 15 other things that I want to tackle, and Andy's always like, focus. We need to focus here. Like, do not get distracted. the things that I would encourage, without giving, specifics, because everybody has to figure their own part out, what I would say is look at the environmental pressures that we're having today. And, one of those relates to deforestation. The other relates to, plastic in the environment. And so one of the things that I would say is I see so much right now on the news regarding recyclability and the true nature of biodegradability. And so I would challenge entrepreneurs to think about ways that we can deliver the consumer experience that we expect, right? We all love to get the convenience of something in a bottle, or have a straw that actually doesn't like fall apart in your drink because it's cardboard. Look through the ability to create the things that we need and love every day. That's actually one of our missions, in a sustainable manner, right? And one of those things I would go after is plastic. I would go after continuing the convenience and functionality of the plastic that we have in our daily lives, but something that probably, when went back into the environment, enriched the environment. So it had a source of nutrients within it that actually helped the environment once it was degraded.
And, if I could just add to that, one of the, for everyone out there listening to this that's looking for the next idea on what they want to create that helps the world, I can just say that I was in their shoes, a year ago. So a year ago, I wanted to do something that was better for the environment. I didn't have any good ideas, honestly. And so I started asking other entrepreneurs, what their ideas were. And that's when Jared, told me about his idea and his whole vision of creating coffee without the bean. And so in that process of me going around and talking to other CEOs and entrepreneurs about what their ideas were, I heard another one that was pretty darn good. It was the second best idea I heard. And I'm going to tell it to you now.
Okay.
And that is to create firefighting robots.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So robots who are, immune to higher temperatures that regular firefighters would be not able to take. That's what you're suggesting?
Yeah, they can be deployed on the front line. In fact, I heard this from a friend of mine, Don. He has a robotic arm company, and he does a lot of underwater deep sea robotics and robotics in space. And he says, hey, these robotic arms can be put on to, tractors effectively and sent out in the woods and controlled through GPS. And you can, basically administer an entire army of robots out there to do firefighting techniques. And, yeah.
It's amazing to me how many opportunities there are when you think about the environmental crisis that we're facing. Obviously, you guys are trying to take a bite out of the deforestation that's associated with coffee production and climate-induced coffee production that's going to be happening in the coming decades. But there are so many opportunities to help try to mitigate the climate crisis that are not only good for the world, but also good business ideas. And so I'm grateful to you guys for what you're doing, and I look forward to having you back on after you have a huge success with Atomo and you're sold in every Starbucks that is out there, and it'll be the default at Starbucks, I presume, and people who want conventional coffee will have to special request it.
That's right. We're on with you. We like that vision.
All right. Very good. Well, Jarrett and Andy, thanks so much. Great to talk with you, and we'll be rooting for you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.